When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saved of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. On that bright and cloudless morning, when the dead in Christ shall rise, and the glory of his resurrection share. When his chosen ones shall gather to their home beyond the skies, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. Let us labor for the Master from the dawn till setting sun. Let us talk of all his wondrous love and care. Then when all of life is over and our work on earth is done, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, when the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there.
In his book, The Mysterious Universe, Sir James Jeans says, "From the intrinsic evidence of his creation, the great architect of the universe now begins to appear as a pure mathematician." I believe his use of that expression, the architect of the universe, is very significant. It implies that the universe was created, that it didn't come into existence by chance. Of course, this is something which the writer of the letter to Hebrews says in chapter 3, verse 4. He says, "For every house is builded by some man, but he that built all things is God." And it takes our minds right back to the beginning of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Now it's right here that the great battle has always been and will always be fought. The battle as to the origin of the universe. Because once a man is willing to agree that the universe had a creator, once he agrees that everything he sees about him came from the mind and hands of a supreme being, there is really no further reason for him to refuse to believe either the Bible is the Word of God or Jesus Christ is the Son of God. But there are some people who don't want to accept this idea of God, and they tell us, therefore, that the universe came into existence by accident, by chance. Well, let's ask ourselves the question tonight. Does the world around us look as if it happened by chance? Or does it show evidence of having been designed or planned or worked out or invented? And perhaps that's the better word, invented, because, you know, many a man can build a car who couldn't invent a car. Invention precedes creation or construction. Before you can begin to build, you have to have the plans, you have to have the design. I think you would agree that there are many men today who could build a home, a house, for example, but they would have to be given the plans from the architect first. It's the architect who sees the finished house in his mind even before the foundation is laid. He has a mental picture of that house before the building begins. Therefore, it takes far greater wisdom to invent a thing than it does to make it. And the question I want us to think about tonight is, who invented the universe? I once heard the story of a man, I believe it was a true story, a man who had a watch that didn't keep time. And he took it from one watchmaker to another. They all examined it, they all pronounced it to be perfect, and they all said there was no reason why it shouldn't keep perfect time. There was no fault in it. And yet not one of them could regulate the watch, not one of them could make it run accurately. Finally, one man took the watch apart and counted every cog, every tooth on every wheel in the watch. And he discovered that one of the wheels had one tooth fewer than it ought to have. It had 59 when it should have 60. Now all the watchmaker's art of the world could never have regulated that watch to make it keep correct time, because the one who designed it had intended that certain wheels should be made with 60 teeth on them, and others with 12 teeth, and unless the watch was built to his specifications, it simply couldn't keep time. It was out of balance mathematically. Now this story tells us two things. First, the one who invented that watch could count. And secondly, that he employed that skill in the thing that he made. Well, the universe is like a watch, and happily, the one who invented it is the one who created it and made it. God didn't devise the universe and hand the plans to somebody else to carry out, but he planned and produced the universe himself, so that, unlike that faulty watch, there has been no mistake made, and the universe keeps perfect time like a watch designed by a master craftsman and made accurately. If you were to go out into the garden on a starry night and look up at the sky, you could fix your eye on a particular spot in the sky and then go back to the same garden just 1 year later and look in the same direction, and you would see the same star in the same position. If you went back 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later, it would be the same. If it were possible for you to go back after 500 years, the same star would have returned to the same spot at the same time. Now, this doesn't mean the star has never moved. It has moved. But while it is constantly moving, it has returned to its exact spot at yearly intervals, just like the fingers on a well-regulated watch, because the stars are moving along well-ordered courses with a mathematical precision. That is exactly why the astronomers can tell you just when a star will appear, maybe after a lapse of many years, or just when there's going to be an eclipse. Why, the heavens are a most wonderful timepiece. They mark not just the minutes and the hours and the days, but the years and the centuries. Have you seen the adverts for these new quartz crystal watches? They must be remarkable things, because they tell us that they'll keep accurate time to within 15 seconds in a year in some cases. Now, that's very good, but even these watches have to be regulated. And we tune to the radio when we get what we call Greenwich Mean Time. That's correct time. But what tells Greenwich what the time is? Where do they get their time? Why, they get it direct from God's timepiece, fresh from the stars. And by the way, speaking of accuracy, you're a great traveler. Do you know that the earth on which you're sitting or standing right now is spinning on its axis at 1,000 miles an hour, and it's spinning around the sun at the same time at 1,140 miles an hour, and it's spinning with the sun, that's in the same direction as the sun, at 780 miles an hour. In other words, the earth right now is traveling in 3 different directions at 3 different speeds at the same time. And yet it is accurate. It loses less than 1,000th of a second in 100 years. Why, we talk about accuracy, the accuracy of our watches. We know nothing of accuracy when we think about God and his universe. When you think that the absence of one little tooth on a wheel can throw a watch completely out of gear, and would in some cases, I suppose, stop the machinery altogether, just think what might happen if a star got out of hand and began to run wildly through the heavens. Chance? Do you really believe that the heavens exist by chance? And the same design and mathematical precision is seen in the world of nature around us. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 4 and 5, the Authorized Version says that God created every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. Now, when the Pilgrim Fathers landed in America, they found something that they'd never seen before. Indian corn, they called it. We know it as corn on the cob, and some of us like it very much. Well, have you ever seen corn on the cob? Usually the corn is arranged in straight lines, rows on the stalk. If it's poor quality, you get as few as 4 rows on a cob. But it can have 8 or 10 or 20, or in rich land up to 40 rows. And by the way, you may examine a stalk of wheat and find the very same thing. The strange thing is that no one has ever yet produced a stalk with 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, or any other odd number of rows. Men who've grown corn all of their lives, men who've dealt with corn all of their lives, have particularly looked for this phenomenon. They've never found it. Now, how does a thing like that happen? By chance? Why, you might just as well say that the rows of buttons on a jacket, with buttonholes to match, got there by chance. Some of you ladies who've done dressmaking know how careful you have to be in placing the buttons in the buttonholes, and how easy it is to get them wrong. But here's another interesting fact. If you go into the woods or into the orchard in springtime, you have an opportunity of seeing how the leaf buds are arranged around the twig or the stem. I say around the twig because that's how they are. The leaves on a tree don't all grow on one side of a twig because that would cause the tree to bend over to that side. And if the leaves were all placed in straight rows, one above the other, the upper leaves would catch the light and the moisture, and the ones underneath would be hidden. In order to balance the tree, in order to give all the leaves an equal opportunity, nature, or God, has arranged the leaves in spirals around the twig. The number of leaves needed to complete this spiral may differ according to the kind of tree that it is. For example, most flowering shrubs take 5 leaves, along with the apple tree and the cherry tree. Some others, like a raspberry cane, take just 4, whilst a pear tree and a peach take 6. Now you can test this with any tree that you care. You choose a leaf, start out from that leaf, and you'll discover that the leaves above it move to the side in a spiral around the stem, with the 4th or 5th or 6th leaf, according to the kind of tree that it is, appearing directly above the one with which you started. Each kind of tree has its own leaf arrangement that identifies it, and you would never find an apple tree with an arrangement of 6 leaves to the spiral, always 5, and you'd never find a pear tree with 5, always 6 leaves. And this is common in all the world of nature. You'll find the same principle in the world of the birds, too. One of the greatest ornithologists who ever lived, and as you know, an ornithologist is an expert on bird life, was J.J. Audubon, the American. About 10 years ago, I remember, a book illustrated by Audubon, a book entitled Birds of America, was sold for £90,000, which was a record amount. Well, one day, an artist brought to Audubon a picture of a partridge that he'd painted. The scientist looked at the picture and said, "It isn't right. You haven't got the right number of scales on its legs." Now, the artist hadn't imagined that there might be a set number of scales on the legs of a bird, but the man whose life work it was to study bird life, and who knew more about it than any living man of his time, spotted the mistake at once. Incidentally, some years ago, when a silver dollar was about to be minted, the American eagle, which was pictured on one side, had 8 tail feathers in it. But somebody pointed out that the American eagle isn't made like that, and so one of the feathers had to come out. And if you ever have the opportunity of examining a silver dollar today, you'll see that the bird has only 7 tail feathers. Now, I've only touched the edge of this fascinating subject this evening. The examples I've given are the simplest examples that all of us can understand. But men who have the mind for mathematics are able to assure us that this kind of order and mathematical precision and regularity becomes more and more amazing in the world as they go into it. In other words, the few instances I have quoted are not just coincidences. The same principle is discovered wherever you look in the universe. There is planning, invention, design, and order. It is no wonder, then, that Sir James Jeans could write, "From the intrinsic evidence of his creation, the great architect of the universe now begins to appear as a pure mathematician." But what ought this to prove to us, this evidence of mathematical exactness in the universe? Well, let me tell you this. About the turn of the century, there was a great deal of discussion about the possibility of life on Mars. And there were people who very seriously considered the problem of communicating with Mars to notify anybody who happened to be up there that there was life on earth, to let them know that we are here, in other words. But the problem that they had to solve was that of finding a language understandable to both parties. Somebody suggested that the most suitable language was pure mathematics. And don't laugh at this, because it's true. It was proposed to light a chain of huge bonfires in the Sahara Desert and arrange them to form a diagram illustrating the famous theorem of Pythagoras. Now, that is, that the squares on the two smaller sides of a right-angled triangle are together equal to the square on the greatest side. Now, it was admitted that to most of the inhabitants of Mars, supposing they are up there, this might be meaningless, just as it's meaningless to many of us today. But it was argued that if there were any mathematicians on Mars, among the Martians that is, they would surely recognize this as the handwork of mathematicians on Earth. You see, if the supposed inhabitants of Mars could see the fires that were to be lit, the arrangement must prove to them that somebody could think was down here on Earth. Now, why don't men use the same kind of reasoning when they look up at the heavens, when they look at the universe? God has lit his fires in the heavens. The order and the precision that God has produced in the arrangement of the stars and the planets surely ought to convince men that he does exist, and that, as Sir James Jeans said, the universe appears to have been designed by a pure mathematician. What is the significance of all this personally? Well, Jesus once said, the very hairs of your head are all numbered. And in the light of what I've said tonight, I hope you appreciate that Jesus wasn't speaking figuratively, that he meant what he said. The God who is the God of order and design, the God who counts the feathers in the tail of a peacock and arranges them to be a thing of beauty, the God who knows how to arrange the leaves on a tree and gives each kind of tree its own arrangement, the God who knows how to arrange the petals on a flower, that God is concerned about you, has counted the hairs on your head. The message of the Bible is that God did not create the universe and then become bored by it and leave it, but God is concerned. God is interested in you, and God loves you so much that he sent Jesus into the world to die for you, that you might have fellowship with him and enjoy the life that is possible through that fellowship. Sadly, people tell us that they have no time for God nowadays, and I'm reminded of a poem by Norman L. Trott. He said, "No time for God. What fools we are to clutter up our lives with common things and leave without heart's gate the Lord of life and life itself, our God. No time for God. As soon to say no time to eat or sleep, to love or die. Take time for God, or you shall dwarf your soul. And when the angel death comes knocking at your door, a poor misshapen thing you'll be to step into eternity. No time for God. That day when sickness comes, or trouble finds you out, and you cry out for God, will he have time for you? No time for God. Someday you'll lay aside this mortal self and make your way to worlds unknown. And when you meet him face to face, will he, should he, have time for you?
There is a habitation built by the living God for all of every nation who seek that grand abode. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see. O Zion, lovely Zion, when shall I dwell in thee? A city with foundations firm as the eternal throne, nor wars nor desolations shall ever move us. the stone. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see. O Zion, lovely Zion, when shall I dwell in thee? No night is there, no sorrow, no death and no decay, no yesterday, no morrow, but one eternal day. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see. O Zion, lovely Zion, when shall I dwell in thee? Within its pearly portals, angelic armies sing, with glorified immortals, the praises of its King. O Zion, lovely Zion, I long thy gates to see. O Zion, lovely Zion, when shall I dwell in thee? This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres. This is my Father's world, I rest me in the thought of rocks and trees, of skies and seas, his hand the wonders wrought. This is my Father's world, the birds their carols raise, the morning light, the lily white, declare their Maker's praise. This is my Father's world, he shines in all that's fair. In the rustling grass I hear him pass, he speaks to me everywhere. This is my Father's world, oh, let me ne'er forget that though the wrong seems oft so strong, God is the ruler yet. This is my Father's world, why should my heart be sad? The Lord is King, let heaven ring, God reigns, let earth be glad.